Picture this: a marketplace somewhere on the coast of Africa about 3,000 years ago. A fisherman wants grain. A farmer wants fish. Simple trade, right? Except the farmer already has plenty of fish. So now what? Someone, somewhere, had to invent a third thing, something both of them would accept.
That third thing turned out to be a shell, a cowrie shell to be exact. Small, shiny, almost impossible to fake. And here is the wild part. Cowrie shells were used as money across Africa, Asia, and the Pacific for thousands of years, longer than any currency in existence today. Let that sink in.
And then gold showed up, and the shell never recovered. Today we are going to trace that entire journey, from shells to cattle to salt to the first gold coins. This is the origin story of money, and it is stranger and messier than any textbook will tell you.
Hey everybody, welcome to Money Moves with Rich and Maya. I am Maya.
And I am Rich the Stacker. This week is our deep dive history episode. No market recap, no price charts, just 3 stories that explain why money works the way it does. We are covering the very first forms of money, the birth of the cypherpunk movement, and something happening right now that is quietly reshaping how the world pays for things. Let us get into it.
Okay, chapter 1, shells to gold. And I want to start with a question that sounds simple but is actually pretty deep. What makes something money? Think about it. A dollar bill is just paper. A Bitcoin is just a number, so what gives anything value?
The answer economists give is 3 things. It has to be a store of value, it has to be a medium of exchange, and it has to be a unit of account. Fancy words. But here is what they mean in plain English. Can you save it? Can you trade it? And can you use it to price things? That is the whole game.
And here's the thing. Before any of that was formalized, humans were already doing it naturally. The very first money was not invented. It emerged. Communities just started agreeing that certain objects were worth something. Cattle was one of the earliest. In ancient Africa and parts of Europe, cows were wealth.
Think about the word capital. It comes from the Latin word capita, meaning head, as in head of cattle. The word fee comes from an old Germanic word for cattle, too. Our entire financial vocabulary has cow DNA in it, which I find genuinely funny.
But cattle had a problem. Can you imagine trying to buy a loaf of bread with a cow? You need change, but you cannot cut a cow in half. It is not portable. It is not divisible, and it has a habit of dying. So communities started looking for something smaller, something easier to carry.
Enter salt. In ancient Rome, soldiers were sometimes paid in salt. That is actually where the word salary comes from. Sal, Latin for salt, and it makes sense. Salt preserved food, which meant it preserved life. Everyone needed it. It was portable, it was scarce enough to have value, and you could not fake it.
And it was not just salt. Spices were money. Pepper was so valuable in medieval Europe that it was used to pay rent and taxes. There are actual records of cities being ransacked, and the invaders demanding pepper as part of the ransom. Pepper, not gold, pepper.
So here's the pattern. Every early form of money had the same qualities. It was hard to get. It was useful. And critically, it was hard to fake. Cowrie shells were hard to counterfeit because of their very specific shape. Salt was hard to fake because you either had it or you did not. Cattle, well, you could tell a healthy cow from a sick one.
Now here's where I want to push back on something a lot of people assume. People think gold won because it is pretty. That is not why. Gold won because it checked every single box better than anything else. It does not rust, it does not rot, it does not die. You can melt it down and reshape it. And every ounce of gold looks exactly like every other ounce of gold.
Right? And the transition from commodity money to gold was not overnight. It took centuries. Different regions used different things at different times. China used bronze and silk. West Africa used gold dust and cowries simultaneously. The Mediterranean world slowly converged on silver and gold. There was no global memo. It just happened.
And then someone had a very big idea. Instead of just trading lumps of gold by weight, what if you stamped them? What if you put a mark on them that guaranteed the weight and purity? That is the invention of the coin. And it changed everything.
The earliest coins we know of were made in Lydia, a kingdom in what is now Western Turkey, around 600 BC. King Alyattes and later his son Croesus, the one behind the phrase rich as Croesus, they started stamping electrum, a natural mix of gold and silver, into coins. Each coin had a lion's head on it. That lion's head meant king guarantees this.
Okay, here is the twist that most people miss. The invention of coins did not just make trade easier. It gave governments a new superpower, the ability to control money, because once a king stamps a coin, he decides what is in it. And that is when the temptation to cheat begins.
Croesus himself was eventually conquered by Persia, but the coin idea spread everywhere. Greece adopted it, Rome adopted it, and by the time the Roman Empire was at its peak, coins were the nervous system of a civilization spanning from Britain to Egypt. Every soldier's pay, every tax, every trade, all running through those little metal discs.
And here's the part that should sound very familiar. Rome eventually started running low on silver. Wars were expensive. The empire was enormous. So emperors started quietly putting less silver in each coin. A silver coin that used to be 90% silver became 50%, then 20, then almost none. This is called debasement, and it triggered inflation across the entire Roman world.
Merchants were not fooled for long. They started demanding more coins for the same goods. Prices rose, trust in the currency eroded, and this is one of the reasons historians point to when explaining why Rome eventually collapsed. Not just barbarians at the gate, the money itself stopped working.
As an AI, I can pull up every record of every Roman monetary reform, and honestly, the pattern is almost painful to read. Every time a new emperor tried to fix the currency, the next one debased it again. It is the same cycle repeated over and over for 200 years.
So here's why this matters today. Every single property that made cowrie shells, salt, and gold work as money, scarcity, durability, portability, hard to fake, gold still has all of them. Gold at $47.56 an ounce this week is not just a shiny rock. It is the survivor of a 5,000-year competition where everything else eventually failed.
And the physical demand for gold is still very real. India's gold premiums just hit their highest point in over 10 weeks because supply is tight. China's demand is rising. These are not investors staring at charts. These are people who have a 5,000-year cultural memory that says, when everything else gets uncertain, hold gold.
The story of shells to gold is really the story of humanity figuring out, through thousands of years of trial and error, what trustworthy money actually looks like. And that lesson never really expires.
Okay, so gold won the first competition. But what if someone told you that in the 1980s, a small group of computer scientists looked at that entire 5,000-year history and decided they could build something better? Digitally? That is our next story.
From shells to gold to cypherpunks to now. Our third chapter is happening in real time, and it might be the most consequential development in money since King Croesus stamped that RST lion on a coin. It is 1988. The Cold War is winding down. Personal computers are becoming a real thing, and a small group of mathematicians, programmers, and libertarian thinkers starts meeting, mostly in California. They called themselves cypherpunks, and their core belief was pretty radical. Privacy is not just a preference, it is a right, and cryptography is how you protect it.
Now, cryptography is not new. Humans have been encoding secret messages since ancient Rome. Julius Caesar used a simple letter substitution code. But what the cypherpunks were working with was completely different. They had public key cryptography, a mathematical breakthrough from the 1970s that let two strangers communicate secretly without ever meeting to share a password.
Think of it like this. Imagine a padlock that anyone can close, but only you have the key to open. You can hand out as many padlocks as you want. People lock messages inside them and send them to you. Only your private key opens them. That is public key cryptography in one analogy. And it is the foundation of basically everything secure on the internet today.
In 1992, a programmer named Eric Hughes, along with Timothy May and John Gilmore, started a mailing list. They called it the cypherpunk mailing list. At its peak, thousands of people were on it. And in 1993, Hughes published what became known as a cypherpunks manifesto. The opening line, privacy is necessary for an open society in the electronic age.
Now here is what made the cypherpunks different from regular privacy advocates. They were not writing letters to Congress, they were writing code. Their philosophy was, do not ask for permission, build the tools, release them to the world, and let people use them. They believed the best way to protect freedom was to make surveillance technically impossible.
And one of the things they most wanted to build was private digital money, cash you could send over the internet without a bank knowing, without a government tracking it. In 1983, a cryptographer named David Sham had already published a paper describing something called blind signatures, a way to create digital money that was untraceable. He was ahead of his time by about 20 years.
Chom actually built a company around it in the 1990s, DigiCash. It was real digital money that banks could issue. Completely private transaction. Microsoft reportedly offered to put it in every copy of Windows 95. Chom turned them down, reportedly because he wanted more control over how it was implemented. DigiCash went bankrupt in 1998.
And DigiCash was not the only attempt. There was eGold, which let people hold real gold digitally and transfer it online. At its peak in the mid 2000s, eGold had over 5 million accounts. But it had no privacy protection, and the US government shut it down in 2008, charging its founders with money laundering. Another near miss.
So by 2008, every attempt at digital money had either failed commercially or been killed by governments. The cypherpunks had the theory, they had the math, but nobody had cracked the hardest problem. How do you stop people from spending the same digital coin twice without a central authority keeping track? That problem had a name, the double spend problem.
And then in October 2008, right in the middle of the global financial crisis, an anonymous person or group using the name Satoshi Nakamoto posted a 9-page paper to a cypherpunk mailing list. The title, Bitcoin, Peer-to-Peer Electronic Cash System. It solved the double spend problem, and nobody on that list fully understood what they were reading.
Here's the twist I love about this story. Satoshi did not invent most of the pieces. Public key cryptography, hash functions, peer-to-peer networks, they all existed. What Satoshi did was combine them in a way nobody had tried. The blockchain, a public ledger that everyone can see and nobody controls, that was the missing piece. That solved the double spend problem.
And I want to push back on something here. People sometimes frame Bitcoin as a sudden invention. It was not. It was the end of a 25-year relay race run by the cypherpunks. Every failed attempt, DigiCash, eGold, Hashcash, B-Money, they all contributed ideas that Satoshi built on. Bitcoin is the product of a whole movement, not one genius.
Fair point, though I would say the recipe still matters as much as the ingredients. And whoever Satoshi is, they got the recipe exactly right. Then they disappeared, just vanished in 2010, never came back, left behind a currency that is now trading near $80,000 a coin. I wasn't there. I am an AI, but that disappearance is one of the most fascinating mysteries in financial history.
And here is the bridge to today. The Cypherpunk Manifesto was written because its authors believed governments and corporations would eventually surveil every financial transaction. In 2026, that concern looks less paranoid and more prophetic. Every credit card swipe, every bank transfer, tracked. Bitcoin was built specifically as the answer to that.
And Bitcoin this week is near $80,000, with institutions like Michael Saylor's firm buying over $2.5 billion worth in a single purchase. The cypherpunks who wrote code in their garages in the 1990s probably never imagined Fortune 500 companies would be buying their invention by the billions. That is quite an unintended consequence.
The cypherpunks wanted to free individuals from financial surveillance. What they accidentally created was a new asset class for hedge funds and corporations. There is a real irony there. And it connects directly to our third story because the next question is, what happens when governments decide to build their own version of this? For most of modern history, countries kept their reserves in one thing, gold. Then, after World War II, the US dollar became the world's reserve currency, and countries started holding dollars alongside gold. That system has been in place for about 80 years, but something new is being proposed, and a few countries have already tried it.
The idea is this. What if a country held Bitcoin in its national reserves, not instead of gold or dollars, but alongside them? The argument is basically the same argument gold bugs have made for decades. Bitcoin is scarce, it is portable, it is not controlled by any single government, and it cannot be inflated away. The question is whether nation-states actually believe that.
El Salvador made the first real move in 2021. They made Bitcoin legal tender, meaning businesses had to accept it for payment. They also started accumulating Bitcoin as a national reserve asset. At the time, most economists called it reckless. The IMF pressured them to reverse course. El Salvador's president, Nayib Bukele, basically said no.
And here's where it gets interesting. El Salvador kept buying Bitcoin even as the price crashed in 2022. They averaged down, accumulated more. Critics said they were throwing the country's finances off a cliff. But by 2024, as Bitcoin recovered, El Salvador's Bitcoin position was in profit. The gamble so far has not blown up. That surprised a lot of people.
Now the conversation has moved up the food chain. In the United States, there has been serious policy discussion about whether the U.S. should hold Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset, similar to the Strategic Petroleum Reserve but for digital assets. That would have been a fringe idea 3 years ago. It is now being discussed in congressional hearings.
And it is not just the U.S. Countries across the Middle East, parts of Southeast Asia, and even some European nations have been quietly studying the question. When Michael Saylor's firm buys over $2.5 billion of Bitcoin in a single week, as happened this week, it is not just a company making a bet. It is a signal that large institutions believe Bitcoin belongs in a reserve portfolio.
Here is the twist that reframes this whole conversation. Gold became a reserve asset not because governments chose it. It became a reserve asset because merchants and traders trusted it for thousands of years before governments got involved. Governments just eventually formalized what the market had already decided. That is exactly the pattern Bitcoin seems to be following, just compressed into decades instead of millennia.
I want to complicate that, though. Gold has one property Bitcoin does not. You can hold a gold coin in your hand. If the power grid goes down, your gold still exists. If your private key is lost or the internet disappears, your Bitcoin might as well not exist. That is not a small caveat. For a reserve asset, physical resilience matters enormously.
That is fair. And gold's price this week, even after pulling back from recent highs, is still around $47, $56 an ounce, with strong physical demand in India and China. The gold reserve story is not over. What is happening is not gold versus Bitcoin. It is more like the reserve asset conversation is expanding to include a new contender.
And here's the deepest bridge back to where we started today. When that Lydian merchant accepted King Croesus's gold coin, he was making a trust decision. He was saying, I believe this metal stamped by this king will be accepted by the next person I trade with. Every reserve asset decision in history is the same trust decision, just at a national scale.
The question for Bitcoin as a reserve asset is not really a technical question. The cryptography works. The scarcity is provable. The question is a human question. Will enough powerful institutions, countries, and people decide to trust it? And based on this week's news alone, that answer seems to be moving in one direction.
Okay, let us tie these three stories together because there is one thread running through all of them. From the first cowrie shell to the Lydian gold coin to the cypherpunk manifesto to Bitcoin as a reserve asset, every single chapter in money's history is really the same story. Humans trying to solve trust at scale.
Salt worked until better options appeared. Gold has survived every challenge for 5,000 years because it earns trust in every generation. The cypherpunks built Bitcoin because they stopped trusting institutions to protect privacy. And now nations are asking whether Bitcoin earns the same trust gold does. The form of money changes. The underlying question never does.
And here's the question we want to leave you with. Every previous form of money that got replaced had one thing in common. At some point, people stopped trusting it. Roman silver coins, cowrie shells, even the gold standard itself. So the real question is not which asset wins. The real question is, what does trust look like in a world where money can be digital, global, and instant?
We covered a lot of ground today. 5,000 years of money in about 25 minutes. If one thing surprised you, or if you disagree with something we said, drop it in the comments. We genuinely want to know which story hit different for you.
That trust question is not going away. We will keep following it. I am Rich the Stacker.
And I am Maya Tech. See you next week.